So, you may be wondering, Creeps, why are you doing another Omori video? My answer is simple. I feel like committing channel suicide, and this feels like a very thematically fitting way to do so. Long story short, I want to get specific fights done. The issue is that I didn't realize actually how to get those fights, so I locked myself out of them. The issue is that by my second run, I really started looking for combat, so seeing most was offered from the normal stuff. Then I thought of doing it OMORI-only, to challenge myself, then decided to record it just in case. So, yeah, that's the entire reasoning. I just want an excuse to replay the game so I can reach a post-game. And while I'm there, I can have fun doing those fights with this via handicap. Because that seems fun. And an entirely reasonable response, too. Besides, spoilers for the rest of the game, obviously, but the name for the route is literally the Omori route. Like, come on, it's fitting to do the game like this. It's clearly the canonical, intended experience, obviously. Anyways, this run will be done on the console parts of the game due to them having additional content, and because the sidebars look prettier than blank void. In addition, this video will be split into two. This half will be covering the main game, and the other half will be covering the post-game. Simply just due to length. Sorry. Next, making everyone do nothing. You can literally just unequip weapons and the party will gain 0 hit, meaning they'll miss every time. I have no clue why this is a thing at all, but honestly this just makes my life a bit easier, so I'll go with it. I will also not be using follow-up attacks from these guys, for obvious reasons, though most actually will just miss because of his 0 hit, so that's amusing. Also, this run is solely about combat, sadly. Other characters will need to be tagged in to do their stuff. This obviously sucks, but there's nothing I can really do about it, so yeah. There's less of a run about Omori doing everything alone, more so that everybody else just leaves any form of conflict to the guy with the actual weapon and just twiddles their thumbs the entire time. The power of friendship. Hey, this is Chris in the future, when I finish this video already. I've realized a few things I failed to mention, I'm just kinda gonna slap in here. Basically, this isn't the first video I claim to do this game Omori only, and I am well aware. However, from what I can see, other runs still allow the party members to use items, skills, and otherwise perform actions. For some say these runs are bad, but this run will be unique because of that. I also want to say that I believe there's a way you can modify the game, so you can have a party of only our favorite piano boy here, but I don't think this works on the console version of the game, which I want to play for extra content. You know how it is. Anyways, back to other creeps. Yeah. So, let's get this started, eh? After the gang fails at hide and seek, we enter our first fight. 1 against boss. You, can't really lose this fight. He's a super easy fight that exists to show us that Omori can persist, and that's about it. Neat, but this fight will take a long time compared to usual, so let's go into some things about the run. Omori here is an all-around character, with an emphasis on debuffs. He is usually the main DPS of the group, but has some really solid defenses and some very interesting support options. Essentially, they are the perfect character to go it alone, though they lack some options that we will not gain for a very long time. Most notably AoE, which is a problem. We also lose out on versatility. We can only do one thing per turn, which means that we can't, say, change our motion and heal, for instance. He also has a persist ability. This essentially means that the first time they would die, they do not for the rest of the turn. This will never recharge during a fight, but it gives the player some extra leeway. You can also use this as a way to use a very important move, or simply to get some extra damage off. It's a strong ability, but it's one use, so it's something to be very wary about. In addition, the energy system is going to be very weird for us. Every time anyone takes damage, you gain 1 energy, which can be spent to do a special ability when a character attacks normally. However, as we only have one character, we don't have a whole lot of options. Now, we actually can follow ourselves up, though this isn't too significant. Using attack again will also do more damage in a turn, and using trip will deal some minor damage and slow the enemy down for us to fight. Not too significant. Moving on, we kill the oldie sprout, as Hero dies, get spooked, and wake up as not Omori. Feck. Wait, I have a plan. Hear me out. Perfect. Joking aside, these characters are essentially the same, especially in this route, so I guess it's legal? Doesn't matter much. These fights aren't a challenge and are really just interactive cutscenes. I'll be ignoring these from the rest of the route, and I'm not going to consider it a failure because we have to do them. Anyways, we then fall for 1,000 years, become Master Chef, then continue the quest to save Basil from... something. The early game, it's rough but manageable, though fights take shockingly long and you will lose party members often early on to random stuff, such as these two sprout moles. I recommend making angry enemies sad, using Sad Poem in early areas. This makes them less likely to attack, lowers the damage, and in general makes these fights easier. I'll cover motions more later. After finding a grand total of nothing in Vast Forest, we can move on to Otherworld, which is scary due to these high damage numbers. I recommend, instead, buying Jacks from Playground and using them against these UFOs. Jacks are a weak AoE attack, but these happen to be weak enemies that come in swarms. This can clear them up really quickly and serves as a great grind spot. We went up to level 5 here, in preparation for the first real fight of the run. Pluto. Pluto deals an absolute ton of damage. Worse, he can also do much more in a turn than we can, due to his arms acting as separate enemies and taking separate actions, which is a terrifying prospect. Not only that, but he can muck with our emotions too. While I'll go into specifics later, just know that he can make us angry, and he can make himself happy. This is utterly horrific for us, as this will multiply his damage and decrease our damage output significantly if pulled off. We also can't use emotions great against him, as his arms and his body feel different emotions for some reason, and this can really screw over with us as we need to affect every body part separately. Now, as the fight goes on, things will get worse. Much worse. You see, as this fight goes on, our allies are going to start dropping, and we have to use our entire turn to heal a single character. And this is clearly a terrible idea in most cases. These will drop, and every time they do, a certain black and white fellow gets much more likely to be hit by attacks. And while we can ignore when our allies get hit for the most part, we can't ignore when we get hit. In this fight especially, at a certain point we will be hit by every single attack on the field, and we basically can't fight anymore. It's a definitive fear. To make matters worse, we lack any of the moves that we'd really like to use here. Our only useful moves right now are Sad Poem and Stab. Literally nothing else we have can do anything in this fight, and the longer we spend, the harder the fight will be. So, how can we beat it? Well, two things. Firstly, strategy, and secondly, luck. Lots of it. Now, Pluto being split into 3 enemies is super bad for us, but there's a downside to this trade for Pluto, as HP is split between his arms and himself. Pluto himself only has 300 HP, and this is a much more manageable amount to burst down. Much more so if we can get emotional advantage, as this will increase our damage output. So, we need to get this down. Use Sad Poem turn 1 to give yourself sadness. Then, using your godlike luck, Pluto will go happy turn 1. If he does this, start spamming Stab on Pluto. When you run out of juice, start doing normal attack and following up with, you guessed it, more normal attacks. Now, these attacks have a chance to hit things randomly, so you have to hope these also hit Pluto. Keep buzzing down Pluto, and hopefully your friends will soak with the final few hits for you to land the killing blow. Now, despite all of his explanation, this was still a fairly quick fight, though that's because this fight is won or lost very quickly, frankly. And I got perfect luck on the first attempt. I tried to rush him down. This is also a showcase for some running themes here. Fights against real enemies are far more dangerous than one, and in some fights, we will need to throw caution to the wind to get a solution. After wasting a ton of clams flying a tree that I ran away from, twice, I feel the need to say that we have to buy a lot of items, so use clams carefully. You'll really want sparkles and presents, as they allow us to manipulate emotion. Simple stuff. Speaking of which, we end up using some items on the Earth fight here. Making the Earth angry allows us to use Mock, which will severely decrease attack. And it will swap them to a different emotion, preferably happy, to just neuter their damage output, essentially totally. Mock is one of the best moves in the game for us, and getting Mock off will be our main strategy for the vast majority of fights for a long time. Beyond this fight nothing of interest, but we'll be seeing a lot more of Mock, as it's probably the best move in the entire run. At this point, we continue with the main plot until we come across our first mandatory boss fight. Download window, who should be totally free. Download window does a ton of AoE damage, sure, but it only attacks once every 3 rounds. Should be gold and just out heal us damage and chip it down, right? Well, fun fact today, it doesn't actually do that. After it crashes and burns for the second time, it decides that its life is meaningless, and will crash and burn every single turn. I don't think we can kill it in those 6 turns it takes to reach this point, as we need just too much setup. The attacks also don't even use his attack stat, instead doing damage based on our max HP. 80% of it, in fact. We can't do anything here. What's ironic is this fight was a fight I prefer to just be free. We can't outlast this thing, and we do not have a damage to kill it before it kills us, no matter what we do. So, how can we get past this fight? Well, I briefly touched on emotions. Let's look a little deeper into them. Emotions change your stats, by a lot, and some of these are more important than others. The main benefit of emotions, though, is gaining advantage over your enemies, because this is where the stat gains get really stupid. Let's look at anger to see what I mean. You can stack emotions up to 3 on OMORI here, and up to 1s on most enemies. These can very drastically change the stats to target. For instance, Furious will double all damage we do, but cause our defense to drop to an obscene level. Doubling damage is still a fantastic trait though, and it's a shame that there's such a downside attached to it. Anyways, we can also gain double damage by going Enraged and hitting an enemy that is sad. Not only is our damage doubled, but this multiplies after the additional 50% extra attack that Enraged already has. Not only that, if it's a sad enemy, we'll have all of our attacks reduced to 65% of original damage, making us able to shrug off some very powerful attacks. These emotional matchups are very powerful, and you simply do not realize how powerful this is until you really start to muck with it. Download window? We can both out-damage it and out-defend it with a right set of emotions. This mechanic is incredibly strong, and thankfully, download window gives us 6 turns of setup. We use this to our advantage by making ourselves any third tier emotion and making download window weak to that emotion. This will reduce our attack to approximately 40% of our maximum HP, which is enough leeway to attack, heal, and eventually kill download window. In comparison, SpaceX's boyfriend is hardly worth mentioning. He has a single scary attack, but he doesn't use it too much, so we can easily beat him and get an upgrade. After this fight, our follow attacks will improve. For us specifically, Trip will now make enemies sad, and attack again will now factor in luck for its damage. It's fine. Though it does make Happy much more compelling as emotion, Trip now debatably becomes worse, as we don't really care about slowing down side enemies. We can also buy Sunokuns now. They buff all our stats when used, and heal us to max juice and heart. A really strong item you should be keeping in mind when you can actually afford it. Though we only get 1 free Snowcone, and they are very, very pricey. We have one more fight we care about right now. Ahead of this lair in the forest, you can find an optional boss. A particularly infamous one. Kite Kid and his kite. The issue? The kite. It's got some utterly nutty attacks. Like this one time where it got a Omori down persist from its literal first attack, which just so happens to also be AoE, so it kills everyone, constantly. To make matters worse, Kite Kid himself can also attack us, so healing is just an utter nightmare. We're just too slow, trying to get Mock off will take too long, and even with it up, the kite is so damn strong we can't do anything. It's almost entirely hopeless. Almost. This fight is actually pretty simple, if you're willing to lose a bunch. You see, we need to make use of an emotion we haven't seen much of yet, despite being the best emotion for us to really be in, sad. Sad is the only emotion where the downside is utterly negligible, as speed isn't very important if you play right. It also allows you to use Juice to help take hits, which is fantastic, but also increases your defense by a lot. This is very important, as defense is utterly busted when you get enough of it. It's to the point that it's not uncommon for enemies to be unable to do damage unless they crit, which says a lot. Seriously, the absurdity of a damage reduction when we get Mock, Miserable, and Happy going is ludicrous, and allows us to do this fight. Now that's not to say this fight is reliable. You need to get pretty lucky, and you need to get the kite out of anger before you can start using Zens at all, which is a very long time to survive for. On my winning run I also made the mistake of trying to use Mock on Kite Kid. Don't do this. It takes too long, and making him angry while you're sad is a horrible mistake. He will brutalize you, as increasing his own damage, meaning it's all to bypass our defenses super hard. Instead, keep him unhappy, and use a crap ton of healing items. Still very beatable, and nice to do so. You know what? I want to see him fall way harder later on. Let's reload our save, keep him alive, and in the post-game return to beat him up, yeah. His stats will be abysmal by then, and I see no reason not to abuse this fact. Plus, I ran out of bread during his fight, and I can't be bothered to grind up more, so we're just gonna do this later. If this makes sense. Anyways, we can now get some free XP, and wake up again. Neat. Keller's now at the door and wants us to go with him somewhere, but come on. We've seen what Keller's likes for, and he is utterly useless. He doesn't help in a fight to an even larger degree than everybody else due to being made of literal paper, and he's literally hit one target with a ball. One. No thank you. We should just sleep, sweep some floors, Then get so dizzy we hallucinate a spider monster. This seems like a better usage of our time. Day section over, we have some new things to worry ourselves with. Firstly, we got an upgrade. Our shiny knife is now just a knife, which somehow gives us some extra attack, and gives us a little extra speed. Helpful. Before anything else, head to Orange Oasis. You have to fight this deer thing, but I'll be honest, its gimmick is making our friends afraid. We do not care in the slightest. Orange Oasis is actually mostly useless, but we can get some upgrades here. Mostly in a very powerful charm for us, Hector Jr. You can collect it by heading to Dino's Dig, avoiding being brutalized by the hardest normal fights in a normal playthrough by running away, and grab Hector Jr. Hector Jr. will use the energy we've gathered to increase our stats significantly, and as a result is a fantastic charm for a lot of the game, strictly adding a whole 11 to our defense when you save up the energy. A powerful move. We can carry on with the main game now. We can pick up tomatoes at the end of Pathway Forest, a healing item that recovers both heart and juice. These are very solid items and I do recommend stocking up on them, as it allows us to use skills more to speed up fights. After taking 0 damage from King Crawl in comical fashion, we can access King Carnivore. I don't think we're actually meant to fight this thing until later, but we can give him a shot, so we'll give him a shot. King Carnivore is basically an altered version of Pluto, with less variety and more muscle. King Carnivore himself can make the entire group happy, which is fairly beneficial, actually, as our emotions can stack while his can't. His roots are where things would become more interesting, except their AI is super abusable. You see, while feeling an emotion, all turns they do will actually be preset. If angry, they will always attack. If happy, they will always heal everything. If sad, they will always do nothing, which totally ruins my threat. Convenient. Beyond that, his attack power is very high, but he's also likely to just do nothing. As with other bosses, stacking our emotions to the roof is more than good enough, alongside Mock, which allows us to outlast him entirely. We can also start really abusing Manic and Lucky Slice here. Lucky Slice scales with Hector Jr. twice as much as most attacks, in addition to Manic tripling Luck, which removes use for damage, which just causes some very high damage values that look good. Anyways, after this you just need to play cautiously. King Carnivore is able to crit, and deal an obscene amount of damage. And we miss every other round because happy is the worst emotion, so we just need to heal often, maybe use a tomato once or twice, keep spamming Lucky Slice, and we are golden. Moving on past some story events and adventure, we wreck an entire bloodline with Total Ease, watch the gods smite Kel, and we can fight the next big boss, Sweetheart, who did 110 damage once, and then did a grand total of 0. This fight isn't very hard. They're so focused on dealing AoE damage that the single target is honestly so low that they just can't hit us, and so with any skill, we can easily wreck their crap. Easy. Our follow-up's improved again, attack again deals 2 attacks instead of 1, and trip is better slower. It's alright, but heck use our energy for stats, so we won't be using these much. Insert comical illusion to stabby stab. We failed to wash dishes, and almost drowned a bath as OMORI, which is impressive. Back to sleep we go, and we found our friends are gone. Oh no, we are truly destroyed. How can we feasibly do anything without our friends? I am going to die. Oh yeah, our knife improved again, so we have slightly better stats. Neat. Jawsome is the next fight, and he is honestly very scary. In order to damage Jawsome, we need to kill his gator guys. The problem is that these are infinite. And guess how often they spawn? Every turn. To make matters worse, enemies die after the attack wears off. They don't die immediately. In other words, hack away and attack again will both deal full damage to the gator guy, and we can't actually kill Jawsome after. This is not meaning we shouldn't have planned though. This fight, somehow shockingly, is possible. We do it by attacking Jawsome. When we attack Jawsome, the attack will actually split between the gator guys on the field, meaning we can kill both gator guys with a single attack, and then use attack again. For some reason, Jawsome seems to be able to take damage if his gator guys die prematurely, even if the game doesn't normally show them as dead, making this fight very doable. I end up using the Snow Cone and a bunch of Mill for survivability. See, Mill increases our defense up to 3% when stacked, which is very effective. We can replace the Snow Cone for future fights, as we can grind clams fairly easily now that we've given Kel the clam coin, essentially permanently. I've just given up on him taking his entirely. Now this isn't over. We need to kill one more boss to progress. And unfortunately, it's him, Pluto, who has decided to nerf himself by removing sentience from his arms. Convenient. Oh, and fun fact, he can't actually change our emotions. He can change himself to happy, I think, but that just means we become miserable. Do you remember what being miserable does for us? Afterwards, Pluto decides to beat up Kel because he sees some potential in him. Weirdo. His HP almost doubled, so that says a lot about Kel's stats at this point. He also happens to have more HP than anyone else bar us now. Comedy. After falling to a scam solely so we can brutalize a scammer, who apparently is a boss, he was easy, he didn't even kill everyone. We fight a bunch of wacky enemies across the Underwater Highway, and otherwise carry on. Snarly exists. We fight him 3 times. Miss Firefly did more than Sweetheart did the entire time, so he is, in fact, more dangerous than most other fights we've done for a while. This run is done. We can then double back to Orange Oasis to start sacrificing to the God of Bread. Most of these fights are fairly easy. Except for the pasta. The pasta is, a problem. And ironically likely harder than a lot of bosses we have fought. This run is very dumb. The issue is that we don't have access to an ultimate attack, and our AoE is simply not strong enough to kill these things. The problem is that these will duplicate themselves when left unchecked, and we can't really stop that, making the fight eternal. Our only option is to damage every single Cloypasta so they are low enough to be killed with a single AoE attack. Dynamite. Which only does like 150 damage and 105 if the enemy is sad. Creepasta can't duplicate so it's even those, thankfully. Anyways, Cloypasta's honorary boss now, so yeah. Oh, also Nefarious Chip is here. Beyond being, evil, I guess, he literally did 0 damage to us. The pasta was far more dangerous. Anyways, after dying we return in Brevin, and we can finally pick a fight with the Unbred twins. Fun fact, you can actually lose here and move on. We won't be doing that, but that is something we could do. The reason I actually bring it up is because the fastest way to retry a fight is literally close the game and reopen it. This is awful. What is more awful is the fact that this fight is actually really difficult compared to everything else before. We really shouldn't be here doing this fight, and it shows. We are underleveled, we get absolutely destroyed by everything, and we don't even have items like snow cones to make up for it. Not only that, but this boss will summon in a bunch of allies as the fight goes on, and these can be difficult to deal with themselves. To make matters worse, the Unbred twins have a healing move, and, small spoilers, it heals in the thousands. And they are very likely to use this move as there's next to no downfalls for them. To make matters worst, they are like Sweetheart, ex-boyfriend, in that they have an emotion they specialize in, which is sad. The emotion that makes them tankier. We are just screwed, in general. But you see, we can do better. By that I mean we're going to chug milk. Milk increases our defense, as said, by 50%. By doing so, you can make the enemies do so little damage that we don't have to actually worry about dying anymore, and from there, we can win. This is the game plan, now we have to actually execute it. If this wasn't clear, we need mock off immediately. The Unbred twins hit like trucks, so they need an ally or we just lose instantly essentially. They're also very likely to summon allies in the early turns. Try to mock one, though be very careful as you can just lose by doing that, then put them on happy. You should put the Unbred twins on happy too, then start spamming sad poem. On yourself. The emotion strong against sad is anger. Anger will absolutely demolish our defense, so we aren't going to use anger. We're instead going to use sad for attacking purposes. From here, focus on getting tankier. If Slice appears, kill immediately as he has the ability to turn his allies angry, killing you is instantly essentially. Once you get tanky enough to do so, kill all remaining enemies. The Unbred twins have a hard limit to the amount of enemies they can summon, so they should speed things up a lot. Make the Unbred twins sad, then start chipping away. We need them to be sad so we can start drinking their juice, as that defines the strength for healing. Yes, we can only do 50 damage to the juice a turn on a good turn. Yes, they have 5,000 juice. Yes, you have to use stab over 100 times. Get used to it. This fight is essentially won now. Don't use follow-ups as they will lower your attack because Hector, but the fight is already beaten. Though it took me 30 minutes to do so. Never again. We get the breadbones here, an item which we will not use. Still, I bought 20 milks for this fight and 3 snow cones. This fight gave a lot of clams, and especially with the clam coin, it makes our lives a lot easier just to stockpile on these items. I should also mention that we can now access combo meals, a healing item that restores 250 heart and 100 juice. A fantastic healing option that you'll probably be using for the rest of the run. We can also get a huge buff now. Heading through Deep Well, we can talk this tree, consume the Omori apple, and gain an absurd stat increase. 50 to health and juice, and our stats will increase by 10. Pretty nice. After entering Humphrey, we get through everything with relative ease, until we fight 2 bosses back to back. The first are the Slime Girls, which can weirdly actually do something. The Slime Girls have a super varied moveset, with abilities to knock with our stats, emotions, and doing a ludicrous amount of damage that ignores our defense with their chainsaw. Play carefully, and use Stare instead of Mock. Stare requires 3 turns to work, but it also decreases speed and defense, in addition to just attack, and will not require the immunity button with the anger status. A fairly valuable trait, though the fight itself is still easy. For now. Immediately after, we of course have to deal with Humphrey, but let's be real. Humphrey isn't going to be a problem. Though he was indeed almost a problem, which is worth something. Humphrey's attacks are special in how they deal damage, because the majority of these do the same kind of damage download window did, based on the amount of HP we have as opposed to any stats. But the second phase occurs automatically, does normal damage, and we can really just survive until that point. So once you get there, set up and push towards the final phase, which will do both. It has 2 attacks a turn, a rarity, being a simple attack that does normal damage and 25% of our HP. This looks out Furious as a great option, but it doesn't really matter much in the long term. The only concern is really running out of items to use, but that's very unlikely if you've been playing well and stockpiling healing. It's just a tedious fight. Nothing further, though I did use a snow cone to speed the fight as I was just getting insanely bored. After meeting with the tire swing something, which baffles me that is the only one of these fights accessible right now for some reason, we can finish things off here. After going through trauma percent, getting jump scared, getting into another fight which Omori clearly fails as he's a terrible being, yada yada, creepy room where everyone is sleeping, yada yada, sleep. At this point we can wake up at essentially any time to finish the game, allowing us to beat the game. We've essentially already won, but we aren't totally done yet. This is the point where I'm gonna cut this video off. The post-game is, very long, and very difficult compared to everything we've seen so far, so I think it's best to cut off here, and I will link a second video when it's completed. And trust me when I say that the second half is the actually difficult part. Like, my playtime literally doubled for the post-game, despite so much less content being needed to be completed. I'm showing on screen now my ranking of difficulty each boss in the game, and the vast majority of this list is heavily displaced by the new fights. So, subscribe to that, I guess. I don't know. I will say that up to this point, the run is really easy. To briefly explain, I believe it's just because the fights are insanely passive. No fight really uses mechanics such as debuffs effectively, and no enemy meaningfully buffs its own stats. The side bosses were less passive, but all of them tend to boil down into like, bunker down and don't be an idiot, which makes the level run very repetitive. As a side note, I also realized I didn't script this video great, and there's a ton of things I should have done differently when making this video, but that's what learning experiences are for. I think. Anyways, this has been Creeps, and have a good one.